Thanksgiving was never just about turkey in my family. It was a stage for ego, bragging, and silent power plays. I always sat at the edge of the table, quiet, invisible, just waiting for it to end. But this year, right when everyone thought they were about to hear how Grandpa's fortune would be divided, he stood up and dropped a bomb. He was getting married, and I was the sole heir to everything he owned. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was rage, because behind their smiles were schemes, and behind mine, a truth they never saw coming. What happened next was rather surprising. I will tell you everything. First, let me thank you for your continuous support. If you love stories like this one, support us by subscribing to this channel and comment where you are watching us from. It will be great to hear from you. Now let's jump into the details of what happened. Thanksgiving at my family's house had always felt like a corporate summit disguised as a holiday. Everyone arrived overdressed, overprepared, and overarmed with stories of personal success. The air reeked of cologne, ego, and tension wrapped in turkey gravy. I had taken my usual seat at the far end of the dining table, half shielded by a centerpiece so large it felt like a botanical barricade. That suited me just fine. I didn't come for the show. Uncle Raymond was already 5 minutes into a dramatic retelling of how he closed a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. You should have seen the look on the broker's face when I walked in. He boomed, slapping the table like it owed him something. Pure respect. Aunt Cecilia, never one to be left behind, chimed in from across the table. Well, Braden got into Johns Hopkins, she said, beaming as she nudged her son so hard he almost dropped his fork. We're expecting full scholarships, of course. We raised him with excellence. I glanced down at my plate, poking the cranberry sauce with my fork. I had no dramatic updates, no salary leaps, no degrees to flex. I had a quiet life, a stable job, and a studio apartment that was exactly the right size for someone who didn't want to be noticed. And on most days, I liked it that way. But tonight, that silence felt especially heavy. It wasn't just the noise that exhausted me. It was the way no one really listened to each other. They just waited for their turn to talk. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, leaning back like a king surveying his court. He'd been quieter than usual, though his eyes darted from face to face like he was measuring something. After Grandma died, his spirit had dimmed, but the family's attention to him intensified, not out of love, but out of interest. Everyone wanted to be in his good graces, or, more specifically, in his will. I remember overhearing Raymond on the phone last Christmas, talking about how the old man can't last forever, and how it was only fair that the house should go to him. Aunt Cecilia had started visiting Grandpa every week, bringing food and fussing over his health, but it always felt performative, like a rehearsed audition. I never confronted them. Who was I to play judge? The dinner dragged on. Toasts were made. Wine was poured. Grandpa remained mostly silent, swirling his drink slowly, eyes still moving. It was tradition for him to give a speech at the end of Thanksgiving dinner. A reflection, a moral lesson, sometimes just a joke about aging. No one could leave until he gave it. I was hoping he'd skip it this year. I was tired. Not just sleepy, but soul-tired. The kind of exhaustion that sinks into your bones when you're surrounded by noise but feel utterly alone. I stared at the empty chair beside me, the one Grandma used to occupy, and felt the hollow space her absence had carved into the room. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. I have an announcement to make, he said. The room hushed so fast you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Every head turned toward him. Even Braden put down his phone. For a second, I saw it, the glint in their eyes. The moment everyone thought this is it. This is the moment he tells us how he's dividing the fortune. Then, as if on cue, the front door creaked open. A woman stepped in. Mid-50s, elegant, with short silver hair and a red dress that made her look like she belonged in a jazz club, not our dining room. She walked in calmly, like she wasn't interrupting anything at all. This, Grandpa said, standing up with surprising energy, is the woman I want to marry. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the baby cousin stopped babbling. I looked around. Aunt Cecilia's jaw tightened. Uncle Raymond blinked like he couldn't process what he'd just heard. Braden muttered, "Wait, what?" I don't know why, but I stood up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was because I saw the way Grandpa looked at her, not just proud, but defiant. Like he was reclaiming something. "Congratulations, Gramps," I said, voice firm and honest. Then, without missing a beat, Grandpa turned to me and said, "You're the sole heir of my estate." That was when the air truly vanished from the room. For a long moment, no one said a word. You could practically feel the temperature drop 10 degrees. It wasn't just shock that froze the room. It was envy, betrayal, confusion, and something else that I recognized only because I'd felt it my whole life. Resentment. Not directed at Grandpa, not really. No, it was pointed at me, and I could see it in their eyes. Aunt Cecilia's mouth twitched like she wanted to say something, but didn't have the script ready. Uncle Raymond leaned back slowly in his chair, one brow raised, a smirk forming like he thought this was a game. But Grandpa wasn't playing. "Her name is Lorna," he continued, gesturing toward the woman in red. She gave a soft nod, her smile calm, almost apologetic. "We met at the community center 6 months ago. She leads the grief group. Helped me through a dark time." Lorna finally spoke. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. I've heard so much about each of you." Raymond chuckled dryly. "I bet." Grandpa ignored him. "She reminded me that I'm still alive, that I deserve joy. And while I was rediscovering life, I saw how many of you were circling like buzzards, waiting for me to fall apart." That line hit like a slap. Aunt Cecilia actually gasped. Braden looked up, confused. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. My heart was hammering, but I wasn't surprised. Not really. Not after what I'd overheard over the years. Not after watching my family treat Grandpa like a checkbook with a heartbeat. Still, the weight of what he'd just done settled hard on my chest. Solaire. That wasn't a small statement. That was an explosion. "You can't be serious," Aunt Cecilia finally said, her voice tight. "You're marrying a stranger and giving everything to her favorite grandchild?" I didn't flinch, but Grandpa did. "Cecilia, you haven't asked how I've been in 2 years," he said. "You bring me casseroles and expired vitamins. That's not care. That's performance." Raymond leaned forward. "So you're cutting your own children out? For what? A grief counselor and a quiet kid who never wanted any of it." Grandpa's voice dropped. "That quiet kid is the only one who ever came by without asking for something. You think I didn't see through your smiles? Your weekly visits that just so happened to come with conversations about property transfers." Lorna placed a gentle hand on Grandpa's shoulder. He squeezed it, then continued. "I've updated the paperwork. It's done. Not a threat. A fact. I brought you all here so you'd hear it from me, not from a lawyer." A long silence settled again, but this one felt sharper, colder. Aunt Cecilia stood, her chair screeching behind her. "So what? We're just supposed to accept this? Pretend like it makes sense? You think we won't contest it?" Grandpa looked at her, steady and unblinking. "You can contest it. You'll lose. And you'll lose me, too." The air thickened. The turkey sat untouched. No one raised a glass. It was no longer Thanksgiving. It was a declaration of war. Raymond muttered, "Unbelievable," as he grabbed his coat and left. Aunt Cecilia followed, her heels clicking like a gavel, slamming down. The rest of the evening was a blur. Lorna helped clear the dishes while Grandpa and I sat in the den, the TV humming in the background, but neither of us watching. He looked older that night, but not weaker. More like someone who had carried a heavy load for too long and finally set it down. "You sure about this?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes clearer than I'd seen them in years. "I'm not dying. I'm deciding. That's the difference." I nodded, even though my stomach was a knot, because part of me knew this wasn't over. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. It was just the end of pretending, and the start of something far more dangerous, the truth. The morning after Thanksgiving felt too quiet. No calls, no group texts, no leftover brunch invites like usual. The silence was telling. I sat at my small kitchen table, stirring a spoon through coffee that had long since gone cold, reading and rereading a single text from Aunt Cecilia. "I hope you know what you've done." No punctuation, no emoji. Just that. By noon, the rumors had started. My cousin Tasha messaged me from out of state. "Heard Grandpa went off at dinner last night. What did you say to set him off?" As if it had been me. As if I had manipulated him into rewriting an entire inheritance out of the blue. The truth was, I hadn't done anything. I never brought up money. Never even hinted. I just listened. I checked in. I showed up when nobody else did. Not for Grandpa's assets, but for the man himself, even when his grief made him silent and his presence heavy. But it didn't matter now. The narrative had already begun to shift, and I was the villain in their version. By Monday, Uncle Raymond had requested a family clarification meeting, hosted at Grandpa's house, not out of respect, but convenience. It was a subtle power move, a way of reclaiming ground. I arrived early, unsure why I agreed to come at all. Part of me still thought I owed them some explanation. Or maybe I was just looking for closure. They were already inside when I walked in. Aunt Cecilia sat stiffly on the couch, her arms folded tight across her chest like she was holding in a scream. Uncle Raymond stood by the fireplace, sipping bourbon at 2 p.m. Grandpa was in his recliner, Lorna by his side. "Glad you could make it," Raymond said, not looking glad at all. I nodded. "I figured you'd want to say whatever you need to say to my face." Cecilia didn't wait. "He's not thinking clearly. This woman shows up in his life, and suddenly everything changes." Lorna stayed silent, eyes downcast. "We reviewed some paperwork," Raymond added. "Dad, you signed documents 2 months ago that listed all your children as beneficiaries. Now we find out there's a new will, naming just one person? That doesn't raise any red flags to you." Grandpa didn't flinch. "It raises clarity. I changed my mind. And I had good reason." Raymond scoffed. "You mean because we wanted to protect your assets?" That was the moment it clicked, the real story. "Protect?" I asked. "From what?" Cecilia hesitated, but Raymond stepped forward. "We had a plan to consolidate things. Clean up the titles. Move assets into a trust. It made sense. You're getting older, and we wanted to be proactive." Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "You wanted control. We wanted stability for the family." Raymond snapped. "You're not thinking long-term. And you're letting this sudden romance cloud your judgment." That's when Grandpa stood up. "Let me tell you what I know, Raymond. I know you had me meet with that lawyer of yours last spring. The one who conveniently forgot to mention that the documents I was signing gave you access to my accounts. I know Cecilia has been bringing me expired medication, hoping I'd get sicker faster. And I know both of you have been telling the rest of the family that I'm losing my mind." Dead silence. Aunt Cecilia stood up, red-faced. "You think I'd ever try to poison you? How dare you?" Grandpa pulled a small brown pill bottle from his coat pocket and dropped it on the table. "These are 6 months out of date. You gave them to me 2 weeks ago." No one moved. Raymond opened his mouth, then shut it again. "You've both shown me who you are," Grandpa said, voice steady. "And now, I'm showing you who I am. The estate is mine to give. And I chose someone who didn't lie to my face while counting down the days." Lorna finally spoke. "Maybe it's time you both took a step back. He needs peace, not pressure." Cecilia grabbed her purse and stormed out without another word. Raymond lingered, as if trying to recalculate his strategy. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. Grandpa looked at me, then back at Raymond. "No, I'm correcting one. When I left that day, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The mask had been peeled off. What used to be fake smiles were now outright threats. And deep down, I knew the worst wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't expect to be summoned again so soon. But 2 days after the confrontation, Grandpa called and asked me to come by alone. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it that made my chest tighten. I arrived just after lunch, finding him on the porch with Lorna, who gave me a soft smile and a nod before heading back inside. Grandpa stood, slower than usual, and motioned for me to follow him around the back. We walked in silence toward the old garden shed, the one I'd assumed was just full of tools and rusted lawn chairs. But as he unlocked the padlock and pushed open the creaky door, I realized this wasn't a storage space. It was a vault. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled with dates. A single desk sat at the far end, papers still spread across it, as if someone had been working in secret. He motioned toward one of the boxes marked 2023, personal. Inside were folders, cassette tapes, and handwritten letters. "Everything you need to understand what's been happening," he said, "is in here." I sat on an overturned crate and opened the first folder. Inside were copies of bank transactions with Raymond's name on them, going back almost a year. Quiet transfers, just small enough not to raise red flags. Another folder held legal documents, the same ones Raymond had Grandpa sign under the guise of consolidation. I didn't know at first, Grandpa said, leaning against the doorframe. I thought maybe I was just misplacing things. But then I started seeing the patterns. They were preparing for me to fade out. And when I didn't, they started nudging. I found a letter dated April 3rd in Aunt Cecilia's handwriting. A draft of an email to Grandpa's doctor, suggesting he was experiencing early signs of dementia. The tone was gentle, but the implication was cruel. She never sent it, he said, noticing my expression. But she wanted to. I found it on her USB drive when she left it here once. Then he pulled out a small tape recorder. This one you need to hear. He pressed play. The audio was fuzzy, but the voices were unmistakable. Raymond, if we don't push this thing through soon, he might change his mind. Cecilia, he's getting attached to that quiet one. The one who just listens. Raymond, exactly. That's why we need the power of attorney now, before she turns him against us. Cecilia, he won't see it coming. The recording ended with static. I couldn't speak. Grandpa looked at me. They underestimated you because you never asked for anything. But I noticed. You never came empty-handed, either. You brought me books, conversation, peace. That meant something. I swallowed hard. Why are you showing me all this now? Because I want you to understand what you're walking into. This won't be easy. You're going to be called greedy, manipulative, worse. They'll drag your name through every group chat and church pew they can. But I want you to remember, you didn't steal anything. You earned my trust. And that's more than they ever did. The sun was starting to dip when I finally stepped out of the shed. I felt different. Not richer. Not even vindicated. Just responsible. I had proof now. Real proof. But it also meant I was holding a ticking bomb. Because if they ever found out what I had, this wouldn't stay a family matter for long. That night, I locked the files in a fireproof box under my bed. And I slept with one eye open, because I knew deep down. Raymond and Cecilia weren't finished. They were just regrouping. When Grandpa asked me to help organize a family meeting, I didn't hesitate. I knew what it meant. He was done hiding. And frankly, so was I. The truth had sat in a locked box under my bed for days, humming like an exposed wire. Every time I thought about the recordings, the transactions, that forged power of attorney, my stomach turned. We chose the community center instead of Grandpa's house. Neutral ground. Public enough to avoid screaming, private enough for confrontation. Grandpa even arranged for one of his old friends, Mr. Hargrove, a retired attorney, to sit in and take notes. That sent a message. This wasn't casual. The entire family showed up, even relatives who rarely left their cities. Word had spread that something big was coming. The room buzzed with tension before anyone spoke. Cecilia arrived wearing all black like she was attending a funeral. Raymond wore a smug half-smile like he'd already rehearsed his rebuttal. Grandpa didn't waste time. "Thank you for coming," he began, standing slowly. "I know most of you wouldn't be here if it wasn't about money. Let's not pretend otherwise." A few people chuckled awkwardly. Aunt Renee muttered, "Well, that's blunt." He continued, "Some of you are wondering why I changed my will. Why I named a single heir. The truth is, over the past few years, I've watched how each of you treated me. Not just when I was well, but when I wasn't." He paused and looked directly at Cecilia. Some tried to speed along my decline. Gasps rippled through the room. Cecilia's face hardened. "You can't be serious." He turned to Mr. Hargrove. "Would you play the tape, please?" My throat tightened. This was it. The room went dead silent as the recording played. Raymond, if we don't push this thing through soon, he might change his mind. Cecilia, he's getting attached to that quiet one. The one who just listens. Raymond, exactly. That's why we need the power of attorney now, before she turns him against us. Cecilia, he won't see it coming. The tape clicked off. Someone in the back whispered, "Wow." Cecilia stood, trembling. "That's out of context. You don't know what we were really discussing." Mr. Hargrove held up a folder. "There's more. Bank records. Signed documents. All tracing back to efforts made without your father's full consent." Raymond finally stood. "This is insane. You're making decisions based on paranoia." So he changed his will, fine. But this smear campaign? This is beneath us. Grandpa turned to him. "You think I wanted to believe this? That I enjoyed discovering my own children were orchestrating my end like a business exit?" The room was quiet. People shifted uncomfortably. A few looked at me with something like pity. Others, with suspicion. The point isn't just what they did, Grandpa said, voice cracking a bit. It's what they didn't do. They didn't show love. They didn't listen. They didn't sit with me in silence. But she did. He nodded toward me. My heart pounded. Cecilia's voice was barely audible. She doesn't even want it. She didn't fight for it. Exactly, Grandpa said. She didn't fight for it. She earned it. I should have felt triumphant. But as I looked around the room, I only felt tired. A wave of grief washed over me, not just for the family I thought I had, but for the illusion that had finally shattered. Raymond grabbed his coat. This isn't over. We'll see what the courts say. Grandpa sat back down, exhausted. Do what you feel you must. But I'm done explaining myself. The room slowly emptied. Some cousins stayed behind to say they were sorry. Others avoided my eyes altogether. Cecilia never looked back. That night, I sat on Grandpa's porch as he rocked slowly beside me. You okay? I asked. Better than I've been in years, he said. I finally spoke the truth. And now I can rest easy. He wasn't talking about dying. He meant peace. But peace, I was learning, doesn't come without war. Grandpa's house was quiet again. Not just because the visitors stopped coming, but because the weight that had hung in the air for years had finally lifted. The constant shuffle of eye-service family, the performative phone calls, the transactional kindness, it had all dried up. I sat with him most evenings now, just listening to old jazz records while he told me stories I'd somehow never heard, despite knowing him my whole life. He seemed lighter, clearer, and maybe that was the biggest victory of all. But peace didn't mean safety. After the meeting, Raymond filed a formal challenge to the will, just like he threatened. His lawyers claimed undue influence, suggested mental decline, and pushed for a judge to freeze Grandpa's assets pending an investigation. It was ugly and predictable. Still, it backfired. Grandpa's medical records were clean. His primary doctor even gave a sworn affidavit about his cognitive clarity. Lorna stood by him, dignified and silent, and Mr. Hargrove's documentation left little room for speculation. In less than 3 weeks, the challenge was dismissed. But the damage wasn't measured in court rulings. It was in the silence that followed. No one from the family spoke to him after that. No birthday calls. No get-well cards when he had a brief hospital stay. Just silence. And even though he claimed he was fine with it, I could tell the loss still lived somewhere beneath his skin. So I planned something. On a crisp Sunday in March, I invited a few of Grandpa's closest friends, the ones who still checked in regularly, and a few of my own. We threw him a small dinner in the backyard, string lights overhead, jazz on a speaker, and a table full of food he actually liked. No turkey, no forced performances, just people who showed up. At the end of the night, Lorna clinked her glass and nodded toward me. Say something, she said softly. I stood up, wine in hand, my heart thudding against my ribs. When I was a kid, I said, I used to think that love looked like big gestures. The loudest voice in the room. The person with the strongest opinions. But over the past year, I've learned that love often shows up in the quietest ways. Checking in, staying behind to help clean up, sitting in silence when someone's grieving. I looked at Grandpa. You taught me that. And you gave me more than anyone else in our family ever did. Not just your trust, but your truth. And I want you to know I don't take that lightly. He raised his glass, eyes wet. To peace, he said. Not just the kind that comes with silence, but the kind you earn when you finally stop apologizing for living your life. Everyone toasted. And just like that, the weight of the past finally broke. As I helped Grandpa to bed that night, he paused at the top of the stairs. You're going to have a rough road, he said. That kind of inheritance comes with a target, but it also comes with a torch. And I think you'll carry it just fine. I nodded, even though a lump had formed in my throat. Weeks later, as the estate officially transferred, the house remained quiet. But this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I didn't reconcile with Raymond or Cecilia. I didn't get closure from them. But I did get clarity. I saw who they really were. I also saw who I was willing to be in the face of all that bitterness. Someone who didn't fold. Someone who didn't become them. Because in the end, I didn't win anything. I just refused to lose myself. If you've ever found yourself caught between loyalty and truth, this story might feel familiar. Family doesn't always mean protection. Sometimes, The strongest thing you can do is protect yourself. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from people who shared your blood but not your values?